Commissioner Ben-Veniste.
Good morning, Director Freeh.
Morning.
As you know, the purpose of this commission may be divided into two broad categories. First, we are charged with providing a full accounting of the 9/11 catastrophe, a challenging investigative responsibility. Second, we are asked to make recommendations in a wide variety of areas, all of which with the common goal of improving the security of our nation. We should be reminded that the ability to have such a commission, to operate in part through public hearings and to ultimately deliver a report to the President of the United States, to the United States Congress, and to the American people, a report on our findings and recommendations, is a remarkable testimonial to the strength and durability of our democracy. Few countries in the world would tolerate, much less welcome, such an open and public process. Director Freeh, you have served in two of the three branches of government. You were an FBI agent, an assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York, an office for which I have great affection, as you know, and continuing admiration. Indeed, during my service as an assistant United States attorney, I worked closely with many FBI agents who I regarded as among the most dedicated and patriotic Americans I've ever met. Indeed, some of them are close friends today. You have served as a federal district court judge in the Southern District of New York, appointed by President Reagan, and then you were appointed by President Clinton to be FBI director. Your experience and observations will be an important source of information for this commission. You have re-emphasized this morning the fact that the New York office of the FBI, which was led by James Kallstrom, and then Barry Maughan and John O'Neill, particularly focused on the al-Qaeda terrorist threat. In fact, John O'Neill perished in the attack on the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001, at the hands of cowards who murdered civilian men, women, and children. People who John O'Neill had hunted with a determination that sometimes bordered on an obsession. Indeed, in January 2001, O'Neill's concerns stimulated an interagency group white paper urging greater protection of federal buildings in Lower Manhattan. And that white paper noted that Osama bin Laden, his al-Qaeda organization, and affiliated extremist groups currently pose a clear and immediate threat to U.S. interests. Do you recall discussions with John O'Neill about the threats from al-Qaeda or others that might occur within the United States?
Yes, I do, and particularly in that time frame. If you recall, the trial was actually starting in January of 2001. It went through May. This was the trial of the 4 subjects in custody for the East African bombings. So the New York office, as well as headquarters and myself, were intensely concerned about the security for that trial. If any of you saw the courthouse during the period of that trial, there were cement trucks, streets closed, because we were focused on a domestic attack in the United States by the co-conspirator in that case, indicted but a fugitive, Osama bin Laden.
Let me ask you this. You have talked this morning and in your submitted statement and previously about your efforts to increase the counterterrorism budget efforts that were not accepted by the Congress of the United States in allocating more funds for you. But can you tell us whether it was possible within the FBI structure to reallocate resources within a particular field office or in general? Perhaps using, as an example, James Kallstrom, the former head of the New York office of the FBI, who unilaterally shifted resources to counterterrorism from other areas. I believe you have told us in staff meetings that Jim Kallstrom had half of his criminal division working on counterterrorism, pulling agents away from such traditional investigative efforts as bank robberies, drug investigations, the type of investigations which can overlap with other federal agencies or with state and local operations. Did Kallstrom's sort of entrepreneurial decision on his own, recognizing the terrorist threat, to make those reallocations trouble you?
Well, no, since I concurred in it. I wouldn't call it an entrepreneurial decision at all. I mean, when we needed to put 400 FBI agents in East Africa in August of 1998, we put them there. Now, they weren't allocated in our congressional funding stream as counterterrorism agents, but we sent them there because we needed them there. For years in the New York office, the term is overburned, the number of agents working counterterrorism cases. Now, there were only 3 squads that were full-time assigned to bin Laden cases and al-Qaeda investigations. But when we had a trial or we had an emergency, like we were preparing for the 50th anniversary of the UN or the NATO meeting, or the Pope was coming to New York, we would, of course, allocate hundreds and hundreds of agents who were not authorized budgetarily to perform counterterrorism assignments to that job. So that was something we did continuously. There was never a case, Mr. Ben-Veniste, anywhere in the Bureau that I was aware of where we could not assign agents in an emergency or in the threat of danger to help prevent that. But the reality is, in terms of our congressional budget, they were not then authorized to be working the matters they were working.
Well, given the fact that you concurred and supported Jimmy Kallstrom's efforts in New York City, and given the fact that there has been criticism about the FBI's inability to reallocate resources toward the growing threat of terrorism, and reallocate those resources, as I say, away from more traditional FBI jurisdictional areas, which could be covered by other federal and state agencies. How do you answer that criticism?
Well, I think I would address it by saying 2 things. One, you know, the positions that are authorized by the Congress and audited by their committees as well as GAO have to be allocated to the program areas where they're funded to. That's number 1. Now, from time to time, as in the New York case, we would ask the congressional committees for temporary reallocations. We would advise them as to what we were doing. My answer to getting counterterrorism resources to fight terrorism was to ask for them, and to ask for them in addition to what we already had.
Were you ever reprimanded for reallocating on your own, either on the basis of emergency or on a more generalized basis, resources to counterterrorism as a result of congressional oversight?
No, but I think that's because we were doing it on an emergency basis and on a temporary basis. If we had taken 1,000 agents from our criminal programs and assigned them full-time to counterterrorism matters, I don't believe we could have done that. I don't believe the committees would have permitted it at the time.
But you did not try that?
No, I did not try that because that's not the way resources are allocated.
Let me turn to the subject of the state of the intelligence community's knowledge regarding the potential for the use of planes, airplanes, as weapons. a subject of obvious interest to this commission. Did this subject of planes as weapons come up in planning for security of the Olympics held in Atlanta in 1996?
Yes, I believe it came up in a series of these, as we call them, special events. These were intergovernmental planning strategy sessions and operations, and I think in the years 2000, 2001, even going back maybe to the 2000 Olympics, that was always one of the considerations in the planning, and resources were actually designated to deal with that particular threat.
So it was well known in the intelligence community that one of the potential areas or devices to be used by terrorists, which they had discussed according to our intelligence information, was the use of airplanes either packed with explosives or otherwise in suicide missions.
That was part of the planning for those events. That's correct.
Now, did that come up, the same subject come up again? I know you carried on from the Clinton administration through 6 months, more or less, of the Bush administration. Did that subject come up again in the planning for the G8 summit in Italy?
I don't recall that it did, but I would not have been involved in that planning. The FBI would not have been involved in that particular planning.
We were advised that there was a cap or no-fly zone imposed over first Naples in the pre-planning session and then Genoa during the meeting of the 8 heads of state, and that subsequently it was disclosed that President Mubarak of Egypt had warned of a potential suicide flight using explosive-packed airplanes to fly into the summit meeting.
Yeah.
And to,
I don't dispute that, but that planning would have be done by the Secret Service, probably the Department of Defense. We would not have been involved in that event outside the United States in terms of the special planning, although we probably detailed some people there.
Let me ask you this. To your knowledge, coming back to the United States, was the intelligence information accumulated by the year 2001 regarding various plots, real or otherwise, to crash planes using suicide pilots, integrated into any air defense plan for protecting the homeland, and particularly our nation's capital?
I'm not aware of such a plan.
Can you explain why it was, given the fact that we knew this information, and given the fact that, as we know now, our air defense system on 9/11 was looking outward in a Cold War posture rather than inward in a protective posture, that we didn't have such a plan? Was that a failure of the Clinton administration? Was that a failure of the Bush administration, given all of the information that we had accumulated at that time?
Well, I mean, I don't know that I would characterize it as a failure by either administration. I know, by that time, there were air defense systems with respect to the White House. There were air defense systems that the military command in Washington, D.C. area, had incorporated. I don't think there were probably, at least I never was aware of a plan that contemplated commercial airliners being used as weapons after a hijacking. I don't think that was integrated in any plan. But with respect to air defense issues and that threat, it was clearly known and it was incorporated, as I mentioned, into standard special events planning.
Into special events, but never into the actual defense posture for the homeland protection of the United States. Let me ask you a final question with respect to the Millennium threat. The FBI and the CIA have been criticized for being unwilling to work cooperatively together. Yet it appears during the period of heightened alert prior to the Millennium, the FBI and CIA worked closely together and had several notable successes as the result thereof. Could you explain how that operation worked and whether you reported to the National Security Council of the United States?
Well, with respect to the Millennium Planning, I reported, of course, to the Attorney General. The Attorney General and I worked very closely in concert with the National Security Council, with the Director of Central Intelligence, the CIA, military components, civilian components. This was an integrated and long-term planning operation with respect to millennium threats, which were not only issues concerning technology exploitation, but also the occasion of the millennium as a terrorism attack. But your more important question, I think, is the CIA-FBI cooperation. I don't think it was unique to the millennium planning. My experience in 8 years there is that there was extremely good cooperation between the FBI and the CIA. And that goes back to matters such as the Cole bombing, the East African embassy bombings cases. The Alex Station, which you know from your staff, was set up in 1997. The CIA and the FBI together in a station dedicated to al-Qaeda investigations and disruption activities overseas. FBI agents would regularly accompany CIA officers overseas to exploit al-Qaeda cells and disrupt them. I think that cooperation, in my view, was a very outstanding one for many years.